I never imagined that the happiest day of my son's life would turn into the most humiliating day of mine. There I was, sitting quietly in the church pew, clutching a small bouquet of flowers I had bought with trembling hands that morning, when suddenly I felt dozens of eyes on me. The music that had been playing stopped for a moment, and in that silence, I heard my son's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Mom, you need to leave. Right now. This is our wedding, and you are not welcome here." His words froze me to the core. I thought I had misheard him. I thought he was joking, maybe nervous and not thinking clearly. But then I saw the way his bride, standing in her pristine white gown, looked at me with a mixture of disdain and triumph. It wasn't a mistake. They wanted me out, in front of everyone. I stood, my knees shaking, and I could feel the weight of judgmental stares pressing down on my back as if the entire congregation had turned into a jury. My throat tightened. My own son. The boy I raised alone. The boy I sacrificed everything for was casting me out like an unwanted guest. I whispered his name, barely able to breathe. "Ethan, why are you doing this?" But he didn't meet my eyes. He looked down at the floor as if ashamed, or worse, as if I were already invisible to him. His bride stepped forward, her voice sweet but laced with poison. "A woman your age shouldn't be clinging to the spotlight. Please, let us have our moment." She gestured toward the door as though I were some uninvited intruder, not the mother of the groom. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others deliberately avoiding my gaze. No one spoke up for me, not a single guest. It felt as if the walls of the church were collapsing in around me. My cheeks burned with shame, but underneath the humiliation, something else stirred, a slow, rising storm of anger and disbelief. How could my son do this to me? How could he betray the years of love, the endless sacrifices, the nights I worked double shifts so he could have a decent life? Was this my reward? To be humiliated and cast out on the most important day of his life? I tried to take a step toward him, desperate for one last look, one last chance to see the boy I once knew inside the man standing at the altar. But before I could speak again, the priest lifted his hand, his face grave, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the entire room. "This ceremony cannot continue." His words echoed against the walls, each syllable heavy with a meaning I did not yet understand. The bride froze, her smile faltering. My son's head snapped up, eyes wide in shock. The guests gasped collectively, their murmurs rising into confusion. And in that moment, as the priest held a folder of papers I had never seen before, I realized something bigger was at play, something darker, something that went beyond humiliation. I was no longer just a mother being thrown out of her son's wedding. I was a witness on the edge of a truth that could destroy everything. And the question that pierced my heart as I stood there trembling was this: had my son truly chosen love? Or had he been trapped in a web of lies so deep that even this wedding was built on deceit? After that disastrous scene in the church, my mind drifted back to the months leading up to the wedding. I had to understand how we reached this breaking point, how the son I once held so close had allowed me to become an unwanted stranger. It hadn't happened overnight. No. The distance crept in quietly, like a fog that thickens until you can't see the road in front of you anymore. When Ethan first introduced me to her, his fiancée, I remember the way his voice carried a nervous pride. He looked at her the way a man looks at a dream he's terrified of losing. She was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. Every strand of her hair perfectly in place. Her smile polished like glass. But it was her eyes that unsettled me. Cold, appraising eyes, the kind that didn't see people but measured them, like weighing coins in her palm. At dinner that night, she laughed too loudly at Ethan's stories, but every time her gaze slid to me, it was sharp, assessing, as though she were already mapping the boundaries of what was mine and how soon it could belong to her. Still, I tried to silence my instincts. I told myself I was being judgmental, that I needed to give her a chance. After all, Ethan deserved happiness, didn't he? He had worked so hard, gone through so much. He deserved love. But then the little comments began. "Your apartment is so quaint," she said, looking around my modest living room as if the walls were closing in on her. Or, "It must be hard for you, living on just a pension." I told myself they were just careless remarks, nothing more. Yet the way she said them, with that sugary smile, made me feel like she wasn't just making observations. She was probing, searching for weaknesses. And Ethan, oh, my sweet Ethan, he began to change too. At first it was subtle. He'd miss our weekly dinners, saying he was caught up at work. Then, when we did meet, his eyes would dart to his phone, checking messages constantly. I didn't need to ask who he was texting. And slowly, the way he spoke to me shifted. The warmth I'd always known in his voice cooled, replaced by a detached politeness, as if I were no longer his mother, but an obligation. One evening he came over, and I thought maybe it would be like old times. I cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with carrots, the kind that used to make him light up as a boy. But halfway through dinner, he put down his fork, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and said, "Mom, you know, someday when you're ready, maybe it would make sense for you to downsize. The apartment is too big for you alone. It could help us get started, me and Sienna." I froze. He said it so casually, as if it were a logical step, as if my home, the place where I raised him, the place filled with the last memories of his father, were just another asset waiting to be transferred. My fork clattered against the plate, and I stared at him, trying to find the boy I once knew in the man sitting across from me. "Ethan," I whispered, "why would you say that?" He shifted in his seat, eyes flickering with guilt, but before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked down at it, smiled faintly, and the conversation was over. That night, after he left, I walked through every room of my apartment, touching the furniture, the photographs, the little souvenirs of a life built brick by brick with sacrifice. I remembered working double shifts at the diner, scrubbing floors until my knees ached, just so Ethan could have new shoes for school. I remembered his small voice promising me, "Don't worry, Mom. When I grow up, I'll take care of you. I'll never leave you." I leaned against the wall, tears burning my eyes, and asked myself the question I had been too afraid to face. Had that promise already been broken? The next few weeks only deepened my unease. Sienna would call Ethan during our visits, and he'd step outside to talk to her, returning with excuses, his smile a little more distant each time. When I brought up my concerns, he brushed them aside. "Mom, you're imagining things. She loves you. She just wants what's best for everyone." But the words rang hollow, like lines rehearsed from a script. The first undeniable crack appeared one Sunday afternoon. I had gone to the grocery store near their neighborhood, and as I was leaving, I spotted them both in the parking lot. They hadn't seen me. Sienna leaned close to him, her hand clutching his arm, her lips moving quickly, her eyes flashing with something that looked more like strategy than love. Ethan nodded, his expression strained, then reluctantly handed her an envelope. I couldn't see what was inside, but I knew. Money. My son, handing over his hard-earned savings, not out of joy or generosity, but under pressure. I wanted to march up to them, to tear that envelope from her hand, to shout, "Don't you see what she's doing to you?" But I stayed frozen, half hidden behind my cart, because deep down I realized the cruel truth. Even if I confronted him then, he wouldn't have listened. He was already under her spell. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I wondered how much further this would go. Would she drain him until nothing was left? Would she push me out completely, take my son and my home, leaving me with nothing but memories? And yet, despite my fear, a part of me still clung to hope. Hope that he would wake up. Hope that he would remember the boy who once pressed his forehead to mine and whispered, "It's you and me against the world, Mom." But with every passing day, that boy seemed further away, fading into a man I barely recognized, and I began to realize that if I didn't act, if I didn't open my eyes fully to what was happening, I would lose him forever. The more I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, the more the world seemed determined to show me otherwise. It started with whispers, fragments of conversations not meant for my ears, and the quiet concern of people who had known me long before Sienna ever appeared in our lives. One afternoon, I stopped by the corner store I had frequented for years, the kind of place where the cashier knows your name and asks about your health. I was picking up milk when Mrs. Langley, my neighbor from across the hall, touched my arm gently. She was a kind woman, widowed like me, and not the type to meddle without reason. Her eyes darted around the aisle before she leaned closer, her voice hushed but urgent. "Adeline, I don't want to upset you, but I overheard something last week. That girl, your son's fiancée, she was at the salon bragging about moving into your apartment after the wedding, said it was only a matter of time before Ethan convinced you to do the right thing." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I tried to laugh it off, to tell Mrs. Langley she must have misheard, but her face was too serious, too sincere. She patted my hand, whispering, "Be careful, dear. I think she has plans you don't know about." I walked home in a daze, my shopping bag growing heavier with every step. Inside my apartment, I set the milk on the counter and stood frozen in the quiet, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Was it true? Had Sienna been openly talking about taking my home, the one place I had built with sweat and sacrifice? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every word, every sly smile, every time she had looked around my apartment with those calculating eyes. My mind clawed through the past months searching for proof, for something concrete that would either confirm or shatter this suspicion. And then I remembered the day I had seen her whispering with a man outside the building. He had carried a leather folder, and she had handed him a set of papers with a quick glance over her shoulder. At the time, I told myself it was harmless, maybe just work documents. Now, the memory made my blood run cold. The following week, the evidence became harder to ignore. My friend Gloria, who volunteered at the community center, stopped me after a Sunday service. "Adeline," she said carefully, her eyes full of worry, "I heard something that made me think of you." One of the young men who helps out at the center works part-time for a real estate agency. He mentioned showing a very ambitious young woman around town, someone who said she would soon inherit her fiancé's mother's apartment. He said her name was Sienna. The room seemed to tilt around me. It was no longer just gossip. Different people, different places, all repeating the same story, that my home, my sanctuary, was already being spoken of as hers. I tried to confront Ethan gently, choosing my words with care, hoping to awaken some trace of the boy I raised. "Son," I asked one evening as he came by to fix a leaky faucet, "have you and Sienna been talking about where you'll live after the wedding?" He stiffened, wiping his hands on a towel, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, please don't start. She just worries about you being alone here. She thinks it would be better for everyone if you moved to a smaller place. That way, we could take care of you and you wouldn't have to worry about anything." Take care of me. The phrase burned like acid. It wasn't about care. It was about control. And yet, looking at him, I saw the lines of exhaustion on his face, the heaviness in his eyes. He truly believed he was protecting me. The manipulation ran so deep, he couldn't even see it. The turning point came a few days later when I decided to pay an unannounced visit to their place. I told myself it was just to bring over a casserole, but deep down I wanted to see with my own eyes what was happening. As I climbed the narrow stairs to their apartment, I heard voices through the door. Sienna's laughter, sharp and mocking, followed by a man's lower tone. I froze, listening. "You really think she'll give it up that easily?" the man asked. "She won't have a choice," Sienna replied. "Ethan's already halfway convinced. Once we're married, we'll make her believe it's for her own good. Old women hate the thought of being alone. She'll crack. The casserole dish shook in my hands. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they would hear it through the door. I wanted to burst in, to scream, but I forced myself to turn and leave quietly. If I confronted them now, it would be my word against hers, and Ethan would only see me as the enemy. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, the casserole untouched beside me, tears rolling down my cheeks. The betrayal wasn't just in her words, it was in his silence. My son had allowed her to plant these seeds, to water them until they grew strong enough to choke the roots of our bond. I thought back to a night years ago when Ethan was 10, and he had come into my room after a nightmare. He crawled into my bed, clutching my hand, whispering, "Mom, don't ever leave me, promise." I kissed his forehead and said, "I'll never leave you, baby." And now, here I was, realizing he might be the one leaving me instead, handing me over to the shadows of loneliness in exchange for her empty promises. The world around me began to feel hostile. Every time I saw Sienna, her smile seemed sharper, her voice sweeter, her compliments more pointed, like daggers hidden in lace. She would say things like, "You've done so much for Ethan, but maybe it's time to let him live his own life. Don't you want him to be happy?" And she would glance around my apartment as if she were already decorating it in her mind. But what she didn't know was that I had begun to notice the cracks in her mask, the hurried phone calls she took in the hallway, the expensive shoes she wore one afternoon, shoes I knew she couldn't afford on her modest salary, the small lies that slipped from her mouth, easily overlooked if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. Every detail, every inconsistency. I stored away like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. Still, I felt alone. I felt trapped in a cage of doubt and fear, knowing that speaking out too soon could cost me the only family I had left. So I carried the weight in silence, my chest tight, my mind racing. The whispers had turned into a chorus, each voice telling me the same story. She was after what wasn't hers. And the worst part, the most painful part, was that Ethan was too blind, too in love to see it. I knew then that if I didn't gather proof, undeniable proof, I would lose him completely. And so, the seed of resolve took root inside me. Even as my heart ached, I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would show him the truth, even if it shattered everything. The whispers had already pierced me like tiny needles, but what came next was no longer whispers. It was open hostility, the kind you cannot excuse, the kind that leaves bruises on the soul. By then, Ethan barely visited me on his own. When he did come, it was with her at his side, her perfume trailing into every corner of my home, her voice loud enough to drown out mine. I remember one Sunday when they stopped by unannounced. I had spent the morning polishing the wooden frames that held old photographs, pictures of Ethan in his baseball uniform, Ethan holding his first job certificate, Ethan at his college graduation. I had arranged them neatly on the coffee table, hoping to spark conversation, to remind him of where he came from. But the moment Sienna walked in, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Why so many old photos, Adeline? Don't you think it's time to freshen things up? Young people like us prefer a more modern look." Ethan laughed weakly, and though I waited for him to defend me, he didn't. He just rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "She has a point, Mom. Maybe less clutter." Less clutter. As if my memories, my life, were nothing more than junk to be cleared away. The more she spoke, the more invisible I became. And the more invisible I became, the bolder she grew. At a family gathering she hosted in her apartment, she poured glasses of wine for everyone except me. When Ethan noticed and reached to fill my glass, she laughed and said, "Oh, I didn't think your mother drank wine. Isn't tea more her thing?" The guest chuckled politely, not realizing that every word, every omission was a deliberate cut. Ethan smiled awkwardly and said nothing. I swallowed my pride along with the dryness in my throat. But the worst was the dinner 2 weeks before the wedding. Sienna had invited me to what she called a family celebration. I should have known better. The room was filled with her relatives, people I barely knew, people who eyed me as if I were a curiosity. I tried to engage, to tell a story about Ethan as a boy, but halfway through she interrupted, her voice sharp enough to silence the table. "Oh, come on, Adeline. We don't need to hear another story about Ethan's childhood. He's a man now. He has his own life, his own family. Maybe it's time to let go." The table erupted in nervous laughter, but I felt the sting more deeply than any slap. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair but didn't say a word in my defense. My face burned, and I excused myself to the bathroom, where I locked the door and pressed both hands against the sink. My reflection looked back at me with hollow eyes. Was this my fate? To be erased slowly from my own son's life until nothing of me remained but an old woman occupying space they wanted for themselves? That night, I cried into my pillow, the silence of my apartment pressing in like a coffin. The loneliness was unbearable. I thought of Robert, my late husband, and wished he were there to guide me, to remind me I wasn't imagining things. But all I had were my memories and the steady drip of betrayal that grew louder with each passing day. The isolation grew heavier when Ethan himself began echoing her words. He came over one afternoon to pick up some tools he had left in the closet. As he packed them up, he said casually, "Mom, Sienna's been worried about you. She thinks it's not safe for you to live here alone. Big apartment, old neighborhood. You should think about moving to a place with more support." I froze, the hammer in his hand gleaming like a weapon. "Support?" I asked quietly. "Or control?" He looked startled, as though I had spoken too harshly. "Mom, don't be like that. She just cares. She wants what's best for all of us." For all of us. The phrase repeated in my mind like a cruel refrain. Since when did my well-being have to be weighed against their convenience? Since when did my sacrifices become bargaining chips for their comfort? It was clear then. I was being pushed to the margins of my own family, cornered slowly, deliberately, until I would either surrender or break. And perhaps that was the goal, to wear me down until I had no fight left. But the breaking point came the night of the bridal shower. I had been invited reluctantly, and I debated whether to attend at all. Something inside me whispered that it was a trap. But another part clung to hope. Hope that perhaps in front of her friends, Sienna might soften, might show me even a shred of respect. I was wrong. When I arrived, the room fell into a hush. Sienna greeted me with a smile so wide it hurt to look at. She took the small gift I had brought, a silver locket I had saved up for months to buy, and held it up for everyone to see. "Isn't this sweet?" she said loudly. "Ethan's mom got me jewelry. But don't worry, it's nothing extravagant." The women laughed, their manicured hands covering their mouths. She set it aside like it was worthless trinket. Later in the evening, as games and drinks flowed, she stood in the center of the room and raised a glass. "Here's to the future," she announced, "to starting our new life in the perfect home." Her eyes flicked to me, gleaming with triumph. Ethan and I will finally have the space we need once his mother decides it's time to move on. The words echoed in my ears. The guests cheered, oblivious to the cruelty. My knees buckled beneath me, and I barely made it to a chair before collapsing. My chest tightened. My breath came in short gasps. For a moment, I thought I might faint right there in her living room. Not one person came to check on me, not even my son. He was too busy clinking glasses, too lost in the dream she had spun around him. I left quietly, unnoticed, and walked home through the cold night air. Every step felt like dragging chains. My body ached, my heart shattered, but my mind burned with a single thought. This was no longer about misunderstanding or misplaced concern. This was war, and I was losing. Back in my apartment, I sank into the armchair Robert used to sit in and stared at the walls, at the life I had built brick by brick. They wanted me gone, they wanted everything I had, and they would not stop until they got it. I pressed my hand against my chest and whispered into the silence, "Not yet. You will not take me down that easily." If the bridal shower had been cruel, the rehearsal dinner was merciless. That night was meant to be a celebration of love, a gathering where families would unite before the ceremony. But for me, it was the night I nearly lost every ounce of strength I had left. The restaurant was lavish, with golden chandeliers and crisp white linens. I arrived early, hoping to avoid attention, slipping into a seat at the far end of the long table. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe it might go smoothly. Perhaps Sienna would be too focused on her perfect evening to notice me, but I was wrong. The moment she saw me, her smile froze, then returned brighter, sharper. She welcomed me loudly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Adeline, you made it! How wonderful!" Guests turned to look at me, their expressions polite but guarded. I could already feel the judgment in their eyes, as though my very presence threatened to disturb the flawless picture Sienna had painted for them. Dinner began with small talk, laughter, and clinking glasses. I stayed quiet, watching Ethan glow under Sienna's gaze. He laughed at her jokes, nodded at her every word. The more I looked at him, the more he seemed like a stranger wearing my son's face. When the waiter poured wine, Sienna raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. Everyone echoed her toast. I lifted my glass slowly, but before it touched my lips, she added with a smirk, "and to letting go of the past." Her eyes locked on mine. The table erupted in cheers. My hand trembled. As the night went on, the jabs became bolder. When I complimented the decor, Sienna replied, "Enjoy it while you can, Adeline. Soon you'll have a new place with simpler tastes." Laughter rippled through the guests. Ethan shifted in his seat but said nothing. Later, when I asked about the seating at the wedding, she said sweetly, "Oh, don't worry, we'll find a spot for you. Maybe toward the back. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed near the front." The words stung like acid. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, swallowing the urge to cry out. By dessert, the humiliation was unbearable. Sienna's relatives whispered openly, making comments about my big apartment and how lucky Ethan was to have such an inheritance. One even joked, "Better make sure the old lady signs the papers soon." Their laughter filled the room, loud and merciless. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to remain still, my back straight, my dignity hanging by a thread. At one point, I excused myself to the restroom. Inside, I collapsed against the sink, gripping the porcelain so tightly my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me, an aging woman with tired eyes standing alone against a tide too strong to resist. I whispered to myself, maybe this is it. Maybe they've already won. For the first time, I felt the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on me. When I returned, my seat was gone. A cousin of Sienna's had taken it, and no one moved to make space. I stood awkwardly at the end of the table until Sienna gestured toward a chair by the wall. "There's room over there," she said sweetly. I sat apart from everyone else, watching as they toasted, laughed, and carried on without me. The message was clear. I was no longer family. I was an intruder. The night should have ended there, with me broken beyond repair. But fate had other plans. As the guests mingled near the exit, I spotted Sienna's purse lying open on a chair. Something white peeked out from the edge, a folded envelope. My heart raced as I glanced around. No one was watching. With trembling hands, I shifted the purse just enough to see inside. The envelope was stamped with the seal of the county clerk's office. My breath caught in my throat. Marriage license documents. My curiosity burned through the fog of humiliation. I slid the papers halfway out, just enough to read the top lines. And what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a simple license. It was an annulment decree, finalized just months ago. Sienna had been married before. married and divorced without ever telling Ethan. I shoved the papers back into her purse just as a guest turned in my direction. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole room could hear it. I forced a smile, nodded politely, and made my way out into the night. The cool air hit my face like a slap, but instead of breaking me further, it awakened something inside me. All this time, I had been fighting shadows, whispers, insinuations, but now I held something solid, something undeniable, proof that her perfect facade was a lie, proof that the woman trying to erase me had secrets buried beneath her painted smile. As I walked home beneath the streetlights, the shame of the evening still burned, but it no longer consumed me. The despair had been replaced by something else, resolve. They thought they had broken me, pushed me into silence, but they were wrong. I remembered sitting in that bathroom, staring at my reflection, telling myself it was over. Now I whispered to the night, "It's not over. Not yet." My son might have been blind, but I wasn't, and with what I had discovered, I knew the storm was coming. I reached my apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped into the quiet. The photographs on the table greeted me like old friends. I touched Ethan's graduation picture, my fingers trembling, and whispered, "I'll save you even if you hate me for it." Because that's what mothers do. They fight, even when the world tells them they've lost. The night of the rehearsal dinner should have destroyed me completely, but instead it gave me the one thing I had been begging for: proof. Those papers I glimpsed in Sienna's purse changed everything. The woman who wanted to erase me from my son's life, the woman who spoke about my apartment as if it were already hers, was hiding the fact that she had been married before. She had lied to Ethan, lied to everyone. That discovery didn't break me. It ignited something inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a current of power stirring in my veins. Still, I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted Ethan too soon, he would defend her. If I shouted it from the rooftops, I would look like a bitter old woman desperate to sabotage their happiness. The key wasn't just to know the truth, it was to reveal it at the right moment, in the right way, where lies could no longer protect her. I spent the next morning pacing my apartment, clutching the phone in my hand. I knew exactly who I needed to call: Father Michael, the priest who had known Ethan since he was a boy. He had baptized him, counseled him, guided him through confirmation. If anyone still had influence over my son, it was him. When he answered, his voice was warm and steady. "Adeline, it's been too long." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Father, I need to speak with you. It's about the wedding." There was a pause, then a note of concern. "What's wrong?" "I can't explain over the phone," I whispered. "But please, can we meet? It's urgent." He agreed without hesitation. That afternoon, I sat across from him in the small office behind the church, the walls lined with books, the faint smell of incense in the air. My hands shook as I told him everything: Sienna's comments, the pressure to move, the humiliation, the whispers about my apartment, and finally, I described what I had seen in her purse: the annulment papers. He listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed deeper with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Adeline," he said quietly, "you've carried a terrible burden alone, but you're right to bring this to me now. If Sienna has deceived Ethan about something as fundamental as her past marriage, that is a serious matter. The church cannot in good conscience proceed without clarity." A wave of relief washed over me. For the first time, someone believed me, someone powerful enough to act. "But how can we prove it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If I accuse her without evidence, Ethan will turn on me. He already sees me as an obstacle." Father Michael's eyes softened. "Leave that to me. I have ways of confirming these things. The truth has a way of surfacing, Adeline. Sometimes it just needs the right light." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. For weeks, I had felt like a ghost, unheard and unseen. Now I had an ally. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the photographs once again. But this time, instead of sorrow, I felt determination. I remembered Ethan's little hand clutching mine when he was afraid, his voice promising me I would never be alone. Maybe he had forgotten those promises, blinded by love or manipulation, but I hadn't. I owed it to that little boy, the one still buried somewhere inside the man he had become, to save him from a lifetime built on deceit. The following days were tense. Ethan called once, asking if I was all right after the dinner. I forced a smile into my voice. "I'm fine, son, just tired." He seemed relieved and didn't press further. I knew better than to mention Sienna. The more I stayed silent, the more he assumed my surrender. Let him. Silence was my weapon now. Meanwhile, Father Michael moved quickly. 2 days before the wedding, he called me back into his office. His expression was grave but resolute. "It's true," he said. "I've confirmed it. Sienna was married before, and the marriage was annulled. Ethan knows nothing about it. She failed to disclose it during our premarital counseling. That alone is enough to halt the ceremony." I closed my eyes, my heart pounding. "So what happens now?" "That depends," he said carefully. "Do you want me to confront her privately, or do you want the truth revealed where no one can deny it?" I thought of the laughter at the rehearsal dinner, the whispers at the bridal shower, the way my own son had looked at the floor instead of defending me. I thought of the countless humiliations swallowed in silence. And I thought of my apartment, the life I had built, the dignity they tried to strip away. When I opened my eyes, my voice was steady. "The truth must be seen by everyone." He nodded solemnly. "Then I will stop the wedding. But Adeline, you must prepare yourself. It will be painful. Your son will be caught between love and betrayal. He may blame you at first." "I don't care if he hates me," I whispered, "as long as he knows the truth." That night I barely slept. I lay awake in the dark, the city sounds drifting in through the window, my heart thundering with a mixture of dread and anticipation. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a witness, a defender, perhaps even the executioner of a dream built on lies. And I knew that once the truth was spoken, there would be no turning back. On the morning of the wedding, I dressed carefully, choosing the deep blue dress Robert had once said made me look regal. Around my neck, I clasped the pearl necklace he had given me on our 20th anniversary. It was more than jewelry. It was armor, a reminder of the love and loyalty that still existed in this world, even if it was gone from my son's eyes for now. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see a defeated old woman anymore. I saw someone ready to fight, ready to endure whatever storm was coming. My reflection whispered back to me, "You are stronger than they know." When I arrived at the church, the guests were already seated, their chatter filling the air. The flowers were fresh, the organ played softly, and everything looked perfect on the surface. But beneath that perfection, a tremor of truth was waiting to erupt. I slipped into a pew near the front, ignoring the sideways glances. Sienna spotted me as she entered, radiant in her gown. Her smile faltered for just a second before she turned away. She knew I was still standing. And as the ceremony began, my heart pounded with the certainty that the storm I had been waiting for was finally here. The church smelled of lilies and candle wax, the kind of scent that should have felt holy, but to me it felt suffocating. My hands trembled on the edge of the pew, my pulse hammering in my ears as the guests whispered and the organ filled the air with soft notes. I knew the moment was coming. Father Michael had promised. But before he acted, before the truth shattered this perfect facade, I needed one chance. One moment to look my son in the eye, away from the stairs, away from her poisonous smile, and beg him to remember who he was. I caught his gaze as he adjusted his tie near the side door. His eyes flickered with unease when he saw me approach. I could almost hear Sienna's voice in his ear, warning him not to let me spoil the day, but I didn't care. I reached for his arm, my voice low but firm. "Ethan, I need to speak to you. Now. Alone." He hesitated, glancing at the bridal party gathering near the altar. Then, with a sigh, he nodded and followed me into the small sacristy behind the sanctuary. The door clicked shut, muffling the sounds of music and chatter. The air in that room was heavy, still, like a chamber where confessions and betrayals were meant to unfold. For a moment, we just stared at each other. His face, handsome in his tuxedo, looked older than his years, worn from months of strain. My heart ached at the sight. This was still my boy, the boy who once cried in my arms when he scraped his knee, the boy who whispered promises of never leaving me. But his eyes were clouded now, guarded. "Mom," he said, exasperated, "this isn't the time. Please don't do this here." I stepped closer, my voice trembling but sharp. "Then when, Ethan? When it's too late? When you've tied yourself to a woman who's been lying to you from the very start?" His jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. "Not again. You've been against her from day one. I don't know why you can't just let me be happy. Why can't you trust me?" The words cut deep, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Because I know you, Ethan. I know the look in your eyes when you're in love, and I know the look when you're being used. And right now, I see a man who is blind, not happy. Do you even know who you're marrying?" He shook his head, anger rising. "Yes, Mom. I know her better than you ever tried to. She loves me. She's been there for me. She's been married before." The words left my lips like a blade. Silence filled the room, so thick it was hard to breathe. His eyes widened, his face paling as though I had struck him. What did you just say?" I swallowed hard. "I saw the papers, Ethan. Annulment documents. She never told you. She lied not just to you, but to the church, to Father Michael, to all of us." He staggered back a step, shaking his head violently. No, that's impossible. She would have told me. She's honest with me. You're lying. You're just trying to poison this day because you can't stand her." I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched his arm. "Look at me, Ethan. Do you think I would invent something like this? Do you think I would risk losing you completely just to win some petty war with her? I would never lie to you, but she has, and the proof is right there in her purse." He pulled away, running a hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. "Why are you doing this? Why today of all days?" "Because if I stay silent," I whispered, my voice breaking, "then you will marry a stranger, and you will never forgive yourself when the truth comes out. I'd rather you hate me for telling you now than watch you waste your life on a lie." For a long moment, he said nothing. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his face twisted in turmoil. Then his eyes hardened, his voice cold. "You've ruined everything. Do you even realize that? If this is some kind of game, Mom, I can't forgive you. Not today." I felt the sting of his rejection, sharp as any blade, but I refused to break. My tears blurred my vision, but I met his gaze squarely. "Hate me if you must, but remember this moment. Remember what I told you. Because the truth has a way of finding daylight, Ethan, and when it does, you will see I was never your enemy." The door creaked open, and we both turned to see Father Michael standing there, his face solemn. He glanced at me, then at Ethan, his voice calm but unyielding. "It's time." Ethan looked at me one last time, his expression torn between fury and confusion, before storming past the priest and back toward the altar. My body trembled, my heart cracked, but inside me, a fire still burned. The private confrontation had ended in anger, but I knew the real storm was about to break in front of everyone. The organ swelled as Ethan returned to the altar, his steps heavy, his jaw clenched. Guests whispered as he passed, sensing the tension but not daring to speak it aloud. I followed slowly, my body trembling, but my head held high. The The pews blurred into a haze of curious faces, their eyes flicking between me, my son, and the radiant bride who waited in her gown, her smile too perfect, too polished. Sienna's gaze locked on Ethan the moment he reached her side. I watched her lean in, her lips moving quickly, her hand brushing his arm as if to soothe him, but his shoulders were rigid, his eyes cast down. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. And for a fleeting moment, I wondered if he had already chosen her lies over my truth. Father Michael stepped forward, his robes catching the light of the stained glass windows. The music faded and the chatter stilled. A silence settled over the room, thick and expectant. He looked out over the crowd, his voice clear and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, there is a matter of conscience that must be addressed." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. Sienna's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to see the shadow pass across her face. Ethan lifted his head, his expression unreadable, his hands tightening at his sides. Father Michael continued, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "Marriage, as we all know, is built on trust, honesty, and transparency. Without these, vows mean nothing, and I have discovered information that compels me to stop these proceedings until the truth is spoken." Gasps erupted across the pews. A murmur rose like the rustle of wind through leaves. Sienna's eyes widened, then narrowed. She clutched Ethan's arm, her voice sharp, though hushed enough that only the front rows could hear. "What is he talking about?" Father Michael opened a folder he held in his hands. The sight of the papers inside made my heart race. They looked so much like the envelope I had seen in her purse. "Miss Sienna," he said, his tone solemn, "you entered this union without disclosing a previous marriage that was annulled only months ago. You withheld this information not only from your fiancé, but from this church. This omission is a deception, and until it is addressed, this wedding cannot continue." The church erupted. Guests gasped, whispered, even shouted. "Married before?" someone exclaimed. "She lied," another voice cried. All around me, faces turned toward the bride, eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Sienna's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. She shook her head violently, her voice rising. "No, that's not true. He's making this up." She turned to Ethan, gripping his hand tightly. "Baby, you know me. You know I would never hide something like that." Ethan stood frozen, his lips parted but no words escaping. His eyes darted between Father Michael, Sienna, and me. I could see the war raging inside him, the foundation of his trust crumbling beneath his feet. Father Michael raised his hand, silencing the chaos. "The documents are here, verified. This is not rumor. This is fact." He turned to Ethan directly. "My son, I cannot bless this union until the truth is confronted. You must decide if this is the woman you wish to bind yourself to." For a moment, time stood still. The bride's perfect world, the carefully woven illusion she had built, hung suspended like glass about to shatter. Sienna's mask cracked, desperation flooding her features. She hissed through gritted teeth, "This is your mother's doing. She's behind this. She's always hated me, and now she's trying to destroy us." All eyes turned to me. Dozens of faces, some sympathetic, others accusing. I felt the weight of their stares. But I did not look away. I rose slowly from my pew, my voice trembling but strong enough to carry. I did not create the truth. I only refused to bury it. "Ethan, she has lied to you. She has lied to everyone. If she can hide something this important, what else will she hide?" Gasps echoed through the church. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered feverishly. My son's face twisted with anguish. His lips trembled as he whispered, barely audible, "Is it true?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Sienna's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. Finally, with a bitter laugh, she straightened her shoulders and spat the words like venom. "Fine. Yes, I was married before. It didn't mean anything. It was annulled. It's in the past. What matters is us, Ethan. Don't let them ruin this." Her confession crashed through the room like thunder. Guests gasped. Some even stood, their disbelief echoing through the walls of the church. The illusion of her innocence shattered before us all. Ethan staggered back, his face ashen. "You lied to me," he whispered. His voice cracked, raw with betrayal. "You looked me in the eyes every day and lied." Sienna reached for him, her voice frantic. "I did it for us." "You wouldn't have understood. It didn't matter. It mattered to me," he roared, his voice echoing through the sanctuary. For the first time, his anger wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at her. His hand ripped away from hers, his chest heaving. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some guests rushed forward to comfort Ethan. Others confronted Sienna with harsh words. Phones rose in the air, capturing every moment. The whispers I had endured for months were now shouts, public, undeniable. I stood frozen, tears streaming down my face, not from sorrow but from the release of months of silent agony. The truth had spoken louder than my voice ever could. Father Michael closed his folder, his voice steady above the chaos. "This ceremony is over." And with those words, the illusion collapsed completely. The church had erupted into chaos, but what happened next was not chaos. It was fire. A fire that spread from pew to pew, guest to guest, until the truth could no longer be hidden or contained. I stood frozen near the front, my breath shallow as voices rose around me. Some were filled with anger, others with disbelief, and a few, blessed few, rang with the clarity of vindication. Mrs. Langley, my neighbor who had warned me weeks ago, stood up from the second row. Her voice, though quivering, carried across the sanctuary. "I heard her bragging months ago," she said, pointing directly at Sienna, "at the salon. She said she'd be moving into Adeline's apartment soon. She laughed about it as if it were already hers. She's been planning this all along." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sienna's head snapped toward her, fury burning in her eyes. "Lies!" she spat. "Old gossip from bitter old women." But before she could spin another excuse, Gloria, my friend from the community center, rose from the far side of the church. She clutched her handbag tightly, her voice steady with conviction. "I heard from a realtor. Sienna toured properties, saying she'd soon inherit her fiancé's mother's home. I didn't believe it then, but now—" She shook her head, her eyes brimming with pity as she looked at Ethan. "Now I see it was all true." The murmurs grew louder, people shifting in their seats, heads turning, whispers colliding into shouts. Ethan's face drained of color as he looked from one woman to another, the puzzle pieces he had refused to see now forcing themselves together. And then came the final spark, the one that turned the fire into an inferno. Father Michael held up the documents again, his voice resolute. "These papers are not gossip. They are official, verified. There is no denying them. The deception is proven." In the corner, a guest raised his phone, projecting an image onto the screen near the altar. A photo of Sienna at a lavish party weeks earlier, draped in jewelry, champagne glass in hand. "She told everyone it was a gift," the man called out. "But I know for a fact she bought it with Ethan's money. She bragged about how easy it was." The image hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps turned into outcries. Guests rose to their feet, voices overlapping, some shouting at Sienna, others whispering furiously to one another. A few turned toward me, their eyes softened, as if finally realizing the weight I had carried in silence. Sienna snapped. Her mask crumbled, fury spilling from every pore. "You don't understand," she screamed, her voice raw. "Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I had a choice? I did what I had to do to survive, and if Ethan's mother had any decency, she would step aside and let us live." Her words, meant as justification, only sealed her downfall. Gasps of horror filled the room, followed by silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Every eye in the church turned toward Ethan. The boy I had raised, the man I had nearly lost, stood trembling in the center of it all, his heart torn open for everyone to see. He turned toward me, his lips trembling. "Mom, all this time." I nodded, tears spilling freely now. "All this time, son. And I wanted to protect you, even when you didn't believe me." The crowd murmured again, but now the tide had shifted. No longer was I the bitter old woman, the obstacle to be mocked or ignored. I was the mother who had stood against the storm, who had spoken the truth when no one else dared. And as that realization spread, so did the fire. A woman I didn't know, one of Sienna's distant relatives, rose from her seat and spoke sharply. "Enough of this. She's disgraced this family. She's disgraced herself." Others nodded, muttering words of agreement. One by one, Sienna's own guests began to step back, distancing themselves, unwilling to be burned by the flames of her lies. It was no longer my fight alone. It had become public. Witnesses had stepped forward, voices had joined mine, and the truth had spread like wildfire. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Betrayal thrives in silence, but truth thrives when voices unite. I was no longer standing alone. The room itself had become my witness. The church emptied like a battlefield after the smoke clears. Guests whispered in clusters, their heels clicking hurriedly against the marble floor, their voices low but sharp with gossip that would ripple through the town for weeks to come. Some avoided my eyes, others nodded to me gently, a silent acknowledgement that the truth had finally won. But all of them turned their backs on Sienna. She stood frozen near the altar, her white gown now a prison of silk, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. For a long time, she stared at Ethan, pleading with her eyes, waiting for him to rush to her side, to defend her as he always had. But he didn't move. He stood rigid, his face ashen, his hands trembling at his sides. The man who had once been blind was finally seeing, and the sight of it was unbearable. When the last of the guests had left, the silence in the sanctuary was deafening. Sienna finally broke it, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Ethan, please, you can't let her win. You love me. Everything I did for us." He turned to her slowly, his voice cracking with the weight of betrayal. "You lied to me. About everything. About your past, about the money, about my mother. You made me doubt her, when she was the only one telling me the truth." She reached for him, but he pulled away as though her touch burned him. "It's over, Sienna," he whispered, his voice so low I barely heard it. "Whatever we had, it's over." Her scream echoed through the church, raw and furious. She tore the veil from her head, flung it to the floor, and stormed down the aisle, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. The doors slammed behind her, and the silence that followed felt like a final verdict. Ethan stood there, staring at the spot where she had vanished. Then slowly his knees buckled. He collapsed into a pew, burying his face in his hands. My heart ached at the sight. Despite everything, he was still my son, still the boy I had held through nightmares and scraped knees. I walked to him, my steps hesitant, my heart torn between anger and love. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Ethan." He looked up at me, his eyes red, his voice broken. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't listen. I let her turn me against you. I said things I can never take back." Tears blurred my vision as I shook my head. "You were blinded, son. Love can do that. But you're not the first, and you won't be the last. What matters is that you see now." He gripped my hand, holding on as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "I almost lost you. I almost gave away everything. For nothing." We sat there together, in the ruins of what should have been his wedding day, holding each other in the silence. But the aftermath did not end at the church. The days that followed were filled with consequences, unavoidable, heavy, and final. News spread quickly. Guests who had filmed the confrontation uploaded videos online. The story of a bride exposed for lying about her annulment and plotting for her mother-in-law's home spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, Sienna's name was a scandal whispered in grocery stores, plastered across local forums, dissected by neighbors who once envied her poise. Her family, once proud and boastful, recoiled into silence. Her father, who had laughed at me behind closed doors, avoided eye contact when we crossed paths in town. Their shame was complete, their power stripped away by the very community they had sought to impress. As for Sienna, she tried to contact Ethan. Phone calls, messages, even handwritten letters slipped under his door, but he never answered. One night, when she showed up outside his apartment, screaming that she deserved another chance, the neighbors called the police. The restraining order that followed was the final nail in the coffin. Meanwhile, Ethan began to rebuild, though it was not easy. He was quieter now, slower to trust, his laughter dimmed by the weight of betrayal. But little by little, I saw glimpses of my son again. He moved into a small apartment, started saving money, and cut ties with the toxic circle that had once surrounded him. The world he had built on lies had collapsed, but from its ashes something truer could finally grow. For me, the aftermath was bittersweet. I had won, yes. The truth had prevailed. My dignity had been restored. But victory tasted like ashes when I thought of how close I had come to losing my son forever. One evening, as we sat together in my apartment, Ethan turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, you saved me. Even when I hated you for it, even when I thought you were wrong, you stood your ground. You saved me from a life of misery." I cupped his face in my hands, my voice trembling with love. "That's what mothers do, son. We fight. Even when our children turn away, we fight for them, and I would do it again." The world had judged me, mocked me, and nearly erased me. But in the end, the truth had set me free. And as I looked at my son, broken but healing, I knew that every wound, every humiliation had been worth it. 2 weeks after the wedding that never was, I sat in my living room, sunlight streaming across the photographs that once felt like burdens, but now shone like proof of survival. Ethan sat across from me, sipping tea, his shoulders still heavy, but no longer bent under lies. He was quieter than before, older somehow, as if betrayal had carved lines into his soul. Yet in his silence, I saw something returning. Clarity, humility, and a fragile kind of hope. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for doubting you, for choosing her over you, but I promise from now on, I'll listen. I'll never let anyone turn me against you again." Tears blurred my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow this time. They were the tears of a mother who had fought the storm and still had her son sitting across from her. "We can't change the past, Ethan," I whispered, "but we can learn from it. And maybe that's the greatest gift this nightmare gave us, the chance to see clearly what matters most." As the days turned into months, life settled into a rhythm again. Ethan threw himself into work, not as a man desperate to earn for someone else's greed, but as a man finally building for himself. He saved, he planned, and slowly he began to laugh again. His wounds were deep, but healing was possible, and I knew one day he would find someone worthy of his heart. As for me, I walked through the world with my head a little higher. Neighbors who once whispered about my stubbornness now greeted me with respect. Some apologized outright for doubting me, but it wasn't their approval I cherished. It was the knowledge that I had stood firm when it mattered most. One Sunday morning, as I sat in church after Mass, Father Michael approached me. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Adeline, you remind us all that truth often comes at a cost. But silence costs even more. You did what many are too afraid to do. You spoke when it hurt." His words echoed in my heart. For months I had doubted myself, wondering if I had gone too far, wondering if I had been cruel in the name of love. But now I understood. Protecting those we love sometimes means risking their anger, their rejection, even their hatred. Because real love isn't about comfort, it's about courage. 2 months after the scandal, I received a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, angry, almost desperate. It was from Sienna. She wrote pages of accusations, blaming me for her downfall, accusing me of ruining her life. But at the very end, she wrote one sentence that chilled me. "I underestimated you. I thought you were weak. I was wrong." I folded the letter, locked it away in a drawer, and never replied, because she was right. She had underestimated me. She had mistaken kindness for weakness, generosity for gullibility. But she forgot that beneath every mother's softness lies steel, forged by years of sacrifice and struggle. Now, when I walk past the mirror in my hallway, I no longer see an old woman fighting to be heard. I see a survivor, a protector, a woman who faced betrayal and humiliation, yet refused to bend. And so I tell you, whoever is listening to my story, beware of those who smile with poison on their tongues. Beware of those who confuse love with ownership, who measure family in dollars instead of devotion. And above all, remember this: silence may feel safe, but it is the loudest gift you can give to a liar. Do not give it, because the moment you find the courage to speak, to act, to stand, even if your voice trembles, you shift the story. You break the spell. You reclaim your dignity. I once asked myself if I had lost my son forever. The truth is, I almost did. But in fighting for him, I not only saved him from a life built on lies, I saved myself too. And today, as we sit across the table drinking tea in the quiet of our small apartment, I know this: love tested by fire is love that endures. So I leave you with this question. One only you can answer. If the truth were burning in your hands, would you hold it high for the world to see, even if it cost you everything?